This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Basket Case Clubs with me, Michael Connolly, and my lovely, is he my younger brother or my older brother? I'll leave that one up to you. Steve Connolly, welcome again.
G'day Mick, g'day everyone. Thanks heaps for joining us again. Great to be back recording another episode of Basket Case Clubs. I got it right that time.
You know you're never going to live that down when it happens in episode one.
Yeah, exactly.
How
That's
many L's
something to talk about
are in Basket Case Clubs? Just one, not Basket Case Clubs.
Yeah. So we're talking about amalgamations and mergers tonight, which is another topic that excites the heck out of us.
Yeah, it was interesting that we got so much good feedback about this topic last week. So following on from where we mentioned that we might do it and we thought it was a good idea, then it was good to get some good feedback from people saying, yes, I'd love to hear about that. So tonight we're going to give it, I don't know whether I'd call it a smashingly deep dive, but we're at least going to skim the surface and have a good chat about amalgamations. So Steve, you've been doing quite a bit of amalgamation work. If I had to ask you here we go, where have you chuckled the most? Now, whether you've been able to do it publicly, what's the one thing that has made you kind of either chuckle or just want to bury your head in your hands and go, did that just happen?
Yeah, it's a really easy answer. And it's
there might be.
Yeah, club shirts. So it's fascinating that in so many of those projects where we're working with a couple of clubs to come together and become one entity, whether it be through a merge or amalgamation, and we'll certainly cover off on what the differences are between those two options. But it's fascinating how regularly it's the really small stuff. It's the small things that rear their heads during the process. And while, they don't necessarily bring the whole process unstuck, they take heaps and heaps of time. So the example that I've been giving recently in my work with clubs that are pursuing this option to become one legal entity is of a couple of bowls clubs that we worked with. And admittedly, this process was pretty efficient. It took less than a year for the conversation to start about bringing the two entities together and to prepare a constitution, to get the clubs in agreement about how they wanted to operate following the merge itself, and for them to then become legally one entity operating in the state of Queensland as an incorporated association. So admittedly, full disclosure, it was a pretty efficient project because, often these sorts of things can roll on for years and years and be a discussion that gets picked up by one committee and then something else takes precedence and it drops off the bottom. So it did happen pretty quickly, and largely the reason for that was that one of the clubs had to get out of their existing facility and move to the other. So that was a good catalyst to get it happening promptly.
You can hear the steamrollers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Come on, get out.
I just got a vision of Arthur Dent lying down in front of bulldozer. So, but it's fascinating that in this instance, like so many others, it's that small thing that rears its head during the discussion. And in this case, it was the club shirt. The design of the newly merged Bowls Club's shirt. So, not the logo, not the name. Some of that discussion came and went, but what's our shirt going to look like? And then that was also the carrot, for want of a better term, that was dangled in front of the more antagonistic members to say, look, if we become one entity, we'll give you a free shirt. I think that's partly what gave rise to the big discussion about what that bloody shirt was going to look like.
I thought you might be going to say, if we can amalgamate, you get to pick the shirt, but that would have led to however many members there are, that many different shirt designs. We've got 12 different shirt designs. Which one are we going to pick?
Yeah. And we're not picking on bowls clubs here. The same sorts of things happen in amalgamations or mergers between rugby league clubs, football clubs, yeah, all sorts of entities. It's often the little stuff that brings things unstuck. And the reason for that is that people are emotionally attached to their club.
Yep. Yep. That leads me into the next question that I've got for you. Now, it's tempting, in doing the pros and cons analysis to start with the pros because you and I both know them because we teach them at least once a day.
Mhm.
But in dealing with clubs and in dealing with the people, because that we've become very clear about that. We don't work with clubs, we work with people because people make up clubs. In dealing with people at clubs, what are the cons that you get to see people be afraid of, I suppose?
Loss of that attachment to their club and the history and traditions, and that parochialism that underpins why a lot of people do so much in their club. They're emotionally attached to it, and they might have been involved in that club for decades, and before that their one of their parents or both of their parents, their whole family might have been involved in that club.
Their
So
names on
there's
the honor board.
their name being on the honor board or even on the bowling green.
Mm.
A lot of people do have serious emotional connection to their club, and I make no bones about the fact that that's a really positive thing, and it's often because sport is the only social interaction that a lot of people have.
Yeah, it's important that we just focusing on that parochialism because it can come across as, uh, you know, not giving it the credence or the value that it deserves, because it's not a stupid thing. People get parochial because they're passionate. They love their club. They love their sport. They love the people that they've grown up with or grown together close to in those clubs. And so something that I've tried to really shine a light on when that comes to the front is this is actually a chance to celebrate that. Yes, we're going to change. It might be a change of name. It is likely to be a change of club shirt, but it's that this is now a chance to really focus on that, on what has made both or all of the clubs or associations that are going through a process of becoming one. It's a chance to celebrate that and really shine a light on the great things that people have done.
And to capitalize on that passion, and to capitalize on the fact that there are people that love each of those organizations, whether it's two or more, like you say, coming together to form one legal entity. th- we wouldn't be talking about a merger or amalgamation if there wasn't some similarity in the objects, the purposes, the reasons that those entities exist. Whether it's
Yes.
cricket, bowls, arts, whatever that.
Paddle sports, shooting sports, equestrian
Yep.
sport. Mm.
Well, and that interestingly then, raises that idea of different disciplines within a sport coming
Mm.
together. And we're seeing some of that, and maybe we'll come back to that shortly. But we wouldn't be talking about bringing the entities together to form one if there wasn't a good synergy between what they all try to achieve.
Yep.
So in the vast majority of cases, why are we talking about bringing those entities together? Well, there are plenty of good reasons, aren't there? And I think that's probably what you were referring to when you talk about, some of those pros that we often
Yep.
talk about.
Mm.
Should we cover off on some of those now?
Well, I was just going to say, Steve, you've done a fantastic job of turning my question about negatives into a positive. Are you sure you haven't done any work in politics yet? Well done. Nice
No,
political answer.
no. Yeah.
Let's just round out on the cons first. So we'll get into the challenges in a minute. It's more what are the negatives to coming together as one. Obviously, it's the parochialism that gives
Yep.
people that connection to what they've got. And if you can't overcome that, and if people can't overcome that, then it's understandable that will be a barrier for them to agreeing to go through some process of change. I think it's that C word, though, change, that is really one of the biggest. It's not a con, but it is something that people will see as sometimes, Steve, it's just the fact that this is going to be work. We're going to have to do some stuff, and we're busy as volunteers anyway. We don't have enough time to do any of the strategic stuff or improve our systems or improve our governance because we're spending all of our time doing the doing. So
Mm.
we can see change as a chance to kick up a stink about having to do some work, and we are afraid of that. And the other thing, as I said last week in a webinar, is that it's not the change itself that scares me. It's the unknown somethings that change may bring about. So the unknown is if we become one entity, who gets the money, who gets control over where that money goes, who gets to do the fun jobs, who gets to go and schmooze with the sponsors, who needs to do all of the new work and the rebranding and the redoing all of our social media and our digital presence. So it's that level of change that people can see as the unknown, and they're scared of that.
Yeah, and uh, I what comes to mind when we talk about that word change is some change management studies that I did in a course 12 or 18 months ago, and some change leadership um, person talked about the fact that people don't fear change, they fear loss. And at the time, that seemed like a pretty logical way to sum up why people fear change. But I think that some of what you've just been saying certainly rings true to what I'm about to say, which is I think that in the volunteer world it goes deeper than that. I don't, you mentioned money, and certainly that discussion arises. If one of the, let's say there's a couple of entities coming together and one of them has lots of money and one of them has very little, and indeed might even be in a pretty
Carrying some
precarious
debt.
financial situation, yeah, hence, perhaps why those two entities are talking about coming together to form one. You can understand that the organization with the money might be a little worried about what the post amalgamation or merge entity might look like. But I think that, as we've been touching on, it actually is a little deeper than that, and it's more of the human element, and it's more of that. Yes, definitely fear of having some extra work to do, um, and there's always going to be teething problems, but we wouldn't talk seriously about it if we didn't know and have the experience of plenty of organizations that have gone through that bit of a pain in the butt of
You can
of
get through this.
you can,
They're not
yeah,
necessarily problems. They're steps in the way. They're steps
yeah,
along our journey, and we have to take those steps. And you got to take steps 1, 2, and 3 before you can take steps 4, 5, and 6.
yeah, but then it gets easier,
Mm.
and all of the benefits of being one entity instead of several start to pay off relatively quickly. And I only, earlier this evening was presenting on a constitution and an amalgamation process that we're assisting a couple of cricket associations through. And I said exactly that. I said, you all need to understand that we're abundantly aware, the state governing body is abundantly aware that there's going to be potentially some angst. Some people are going to be a little uncomfortable. But in every one of these projects through which we've worked, people on the other side have looked back and said to us, oh, now we get it. Now we
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, and some of those
Yep,
are the naysayers. Some of those are the people
yep,
who are the biggest barriers or the biggest challenges in your way.
yep.
I
Oh,
tell you.
gosh, yeah, we see that all the time, don't we?
Yeah. All right. So now let's get into the benefits. Why would you do it, and how? What's in your kit bag for helping convince volunteers in these organisations that it is a good idea?
It's often the duplication that we see in administration, so volunteer administration. We're seeing, particularly in regional locations, but not exclusively, we see it all over the place, where we'll see one person or several people who sit on multiple management committees in their local area, and they are filling, in some instances, exactly the same role across those different entities. And the great example, and have we picked on rugby league yet?
But
I
it would surprise me if
feel
we
like,
have, but let's do it anyway.
so we see still a lot of instances of a junior and a senior rugby league club that operate from the same facility, the same clubhouse, the same playing field. They might have separate equipment storage locations, but they're still separate legal entities. Why?
Because that's how it's always been.
That's how it's always been. And it doesn't make any good sense in any other way. And there might be a couple of people who are pretty strong characters, one in either club, that don't like each other, and therefore
Well,
it's
that may be how they split in the first place. If they were one entity and they said, well, we don't like the way that the seniors just spend all of our money and we make it all because we're the junior club. So we're going to take our bat and ball and run. Thank you very much.
yeah. So we see that all the time. You know, a lot of rugby league clubs that where it really doesn't make any sense for them to be separate legal entities, but they are, just because they are.
Yep.
But we'll see. Even so, we worked with a junior and a senior rugby league club in central Queensland where the entire management committee were exactly the same for the junior and senior club. So that had been a gradual process. So all management committee members of the junior club were in exactly the same positions on the senior club management committee, and it had been an incremental process of, you know, people with kids who grew up and started playing senior footy. So then the mum or dad got involved in the senior club and stayed involved in the junior club because it made sense to do so and no one else was putting their hand up. So that is, you know, the epitome of duplication of volunteer tasks, because they're having 2 management committee meetings every month, one at each club. They've got to get 2 sets of books audited, 2 lots of reporting to the state government. That really clearly makes no sense. So the argument in their case was really easy, but we see that time and time again. So there's a lot of duplication in the functions that volunteer administrators are filling across entities. And we're not seeing an increase in the number of people sticking their hand up to volunteer.
Yep. Yep. That's always the thing that happens. So
Yeah.
when it was interesting, the benefits and the pros are all real. We know that they are because we've seen runs on the board. We've seen them come to fruition. I was really interested when I was sitting in a process going through this at a fairly big level in Australia, and I was just fascinated that the arguments that you've just given from a couple of very small clubs coming together are exactly the same sorts of challenges that people like to throw into the mix and bigger merger merger amalgamation discussions as well. And sometimes they play the game about just making the challenge enough to cause enough doubt in people's mind that they will either stop the process or get to a point of voting against it should they be forced or felt that they're forced into a position of doing that. And that's where it's unfortunate, because it is really easy to sow seeds of doubt to get through, even though what I was going to say is that a lot of the cons that we discussed are just perceived. They're not actually big problems. They're just a perception that I've got, and it's enough. And if I'm worried enough, or I am politically motivated, I don't mean politics as in I want to go and run for PM, but politically motivated because there's something in it for me. I'm on my political journey from here to the Chamber of Commerce to mayor or whatever it is, and then it's of benefit for me to control this organisation. Well, to stay the same is really easy. All I've got to do is just say, "Oh, are you sure you want to change?" Because, you know, I heard of this other club where they lost all of the money, and, you know, it could all be made up, or there could be a lot more at play. You know, it's not necessarily what happened, but when it happened, who was leading it. All of the factors come together to make it a success. And one of the things that we are really hot on is to make sure that you take the journey that the people that we're working with need to take. Because if you say, well, it worked really well for that mob in central Queensland and they just came together because they're already there, then we'll just apply exactly the same thinking when we're working with the 2 bowls clubs in Tasmania. It just doesn't work like that, because there are different there are different people, for a start, and different circumstances surrounding the history of those organizations, and you have to take their journey to go through it. So I suppose that's one big piece of advice for our listeners, is make sure that you take the journey that you need to take, not the journey that somebody else took. And even if you've seen somebody else take a journey that didn't go so well, doesn't mean yours can't go well, so long as you take yours and not theirs.
And don't rush the process. Don't rush your members. As soon as, and there's a bit of a caveat on this, because as we say, if you give the members 6 months to look at a
They'll do it in
draft
the last week.
constitution, they'll do it in the last week. But if you give them a week, they'll say, this is nowhere near enough. So this is, to go back to something you said earlier, all about the people, and we need to manage the perceptions. We need to make sure that the members of each entity looking to become one feel as though they have an opportunity to buy in and to be heard and to genuinely have input. Um, because if people don't feel like that's the case, those naysayers are typically more readily able to upset the apple cart,
Yeah.
aren't they?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. If you give them enough, airtime, they'll definitely bloody take it. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
probably time to get into some of the technicalities then. What you've been through this quite a lot and quite a lot recently. How would you explain the process and some of the technicalities in getting it done, and what are the differences or the different options available?
Yeah. So, firstly, the difference between merge and amalgamation. Merge is, as far as the process is concerned, the simpler of the two options. So, through a merge, one entity.
Before you
Oh,
go
sorry.
on, have you ever found it interesting that merge is like the M word? you know, people are afraid of getting married. I'm afraid of commitment, and I'm going to get married. I'm going to get merged.
I'm gonna get merged. Yeah, actually, there's probably something in that. It is a bit of a fear of commitment. Maybe that's part of that human element that we were touching on earlier. We're
Mm.
all a little fearful of commitment, but the merge process is, interestingly, so here in Queensland, it is the process that is not strictly provided for through the legislation, through the incorporations legislation, but it's the one that even the administering body, the Office of Fair Trading, suggests that you pursue first, because it's the simplest process. So one entity winds up and gives everything that it owns, or one or more entities wind up and give everything that they own, including their members, to another entity that is the one that carries on. So it's the one legal entity that already exists. It's already got a constitution. It already has an ABN, and it carries on. If it has formal instrument of tenure, a lease, a permit to occupy with its local council or any other um, landlord, that carries on. If it's got a liquor license and or gaming license, that carries on. So logistically, a merge makes a lot of sense. But if we go right back to where we started this discussion and we talk about that emotional connection that people inevitably have to their club, that parochialism, to convince members of an entity that they should wind up and give everything that they've worked hard at for the last 5, 10, 20, however many years,
Or
can be really
generations.
difficult, or generations can be really difficult. Sometimes
Mm.
it makes perfect sense. So that example of the Bowls Club, one entity really needed to get out of where they were operating from. The other entity had a lot of that contractual arrangement stuff in place, lease, liquor licenses, gaming licenses, and so on. So it made a lot of sense for them to carry on and to not have to renegotiate all that stuff. So that's how a merge looks. Either one or more entities wind up and give everything that they own to another that carries on. It's probably still a good idea to write a new constitution in that situation where the new entity might not currently provide for, in the interests of junior and senior sport. It might be the senior club that's carrying on. Their constitution might not
Of the
strictly
junior
provide for
class of
junior
membership.
membership.
Mm.
Yep. So it's a really good opportunity to review the constitution. The other option then, which is strictly provided for in the legislation, by example here in Queensland, is amalgamation. And through that through that process, two legal entities or more agree to become one legal entity. And through that process, the two or more entities entering into the amalgamation process agree that they'll essentially be wound up upon approval of the amalgamation. There must be there must be a constitution lodged with the application for amalgamation. So it's a really good opportunity again to draw a line in the sand and write a new one. Um, and it does establish a new entity. So that new entity then needs to go and get its ABN and negotiate tenure if necessary, liquor, gaming, and any other contractual agreements into which it needs to enter because the other entities have wound up. All needs to be taken into account during the weighing up of which option are we going to pursue.
So on the bowls club discussion, that could be critical, because if one of the bowls clubs has a gaming license or for a number of machines, for instance, then to to go through the formal amalgamation process means that the gaming license would need to be transferred or relinquished first and then reapplied for.
And yeah, and on balance, it, the negotiation process, consultation process rather, with the state government Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation really meanders and depends on who you speak with. So they were getting some confusing responses, and it looked as though they probably could have renegotiated and paid some fee for the new entity to take on their existing licenses. But they agreed, let's just follow the path of least resistance and merge in that instance. And this highlights the fact that no two situations are the same
Yep, take your
completely.
journey.
Yes, yeah. So in their case, it made a lot of sense, but in a lot of cases, you just can't get past that emotional connection that people have got, and therefore it makes more sense for the membership of both or all of the entities to agree, yep, we're happy to become that new amalgamated entity and carry on, and we're all in the same boat. All of our organizations will essentially cease to exist and we'll all be part of that new entity.
So, what are some of the hurdles then that groups typically face? And these, we've touched on these as far as the people factor goes early in the process. But as you get into the technicalities of the process, what are some of the hurdles or important steps that you'll need to go through along the journey?
Some of the interesting hurdles can be things like employment arrangements. One organization may have employees, the other may have a very different philosophy. Um, uh, so that's a pretty technical one. Um, what was the other part of your question?
The steps along the way. So as
Sorry.
far as even the technicalities of, I don't know. Well, actually, I do know. I'm throwing to you things like meetings that need to happen.
So yeah, even if it's not the statutory amalgamation process that the entities follow, obviously the decisions that we're talking about being made aren't decisions that can be made at the board or committee level. These are decisions that, as we've said, need to involve the members through consultation. But really importantly, we're talking about the members making decisions at general meetings. And they're not just going to be a simple majority of those members present that are going to need to agree, but it's going to be a special resolution. So in most states and territories, that's a 75% majority of the members who turn up and are eligible to vote that vote in favour of making the decisions. So, in the case of, in both instances, whether it's a merge or amalgamation, there's a series of special resolutions that will need to be agreed to at that general meeting, and this comes right at the end of the process. But at that meeting, we've got agreements that we're either A, going to wind up and give everything to the other club if it's a merge process, or B, if it's amalgamation, yep, the members of both entities are going to agree to become one. We're going to adopt this new constitution. We're going to elect these new office bearers. And we typically recommend, in the interests of transparency and openness, and not allowing that element of um, accusation of underhandedness, or the wrong thing being done, and the wool being pulled over members' eyes. We recommend that if it's an amalgamation, both entities need to have a special general meeting. Why don't they have it in the same room on the same day at the same
As a
time?
if for no other reason than as a gesture of good faith and to
Exactly.
build on the trust. Obviously, if
Yeah.
you're discussing things that are outside of the scope of those meetings, and they're within their rights to say, we'll do them separately, thank you very much. But yeah, you're right. As a gesture of we trust you-ness, why not give it a
Yeah.
crack?
Yeah. And that then brings us back to that point that I made or touched on earlier, in saying that that meeting happens at the end of the process. By the time we get to that special general meeting, regardless of whether we're merging or amalgamating, all of the ducks should be in a row. Really, that
Mm.
should be a formality. that we're agreeing to the things formally to which we've already agreed through the consultation process.
If you take nothing else away from this discussion, it's that. It's as to build on what you said before, Steve, take your time in
Yep.
doing this. Do the consultation that is required, because although you and I both know that people will only spend that last week looking at anything anyway, that's
Yeah.
beside the point. They need to
Yep.
feel that they've been involved. And when you go through a genuine consultation process, and obviously this is something that you and I have discussed, will be the topic of an upcoming both an upcoming podcast or at least a podcast and webinars. You need to, in going through that consultation, you need to listen, because you only need to get one little gem in the guff that comes out of, even if it's Grumpy George, let him tell the story that he needs to tell, because and don't just put up your put your earmuffs on and say, I don't want to listen to this anymore, I'm sick of his garbage. He just goes on and on and on. Hang on a minute, we're talking about something very specific here. George does know the history as the life member or whatever he is, or the stalwart or the patriarch or matriarch if it's Georgina. And there's something in those. So let them go and listen and engage. And if you can get that one thing out of it, then of course it was worthwhile. So do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the uh, the the due diligence, the technical looking into the financial situation, all of that really important stuff has to happen. But as we've been banging on about during this discussion, it is so important that we get the human element right, because
Probably most
that,
important.
yeah, absolutely, I agree. It is. It's the most important
Yeah.
element, and that is where we see most of these processes not follow through successfully to completion.
Oh, look, it's the people that make their minds up, and 3/4 of them need to agree with what we're doing. But as you say, by the time you get there, you should know that you've got the numbers, and by the numbers, like, it should be so good that, or so clear, the benefits should be so clear that you'd love to have a, unanimity, unanimity, unanimous,
Without disagreement.
unanimousness. Everybody saying yes. Thank you. So how far can it go? We've talked about clubs, maybe a junior and a senior club amalgamating. We've obviously done some work with the rugby league, the leagues themselves. We've got a junior league and a senior league, and bringing them together. There are great benefits in just dealing with the waste in the system. We don't need two treasurers. We don't need two lots of audit fees. We don't need two lots of registration fees. We can do that in one go. But how high up can it go? How far can mergers and amalgamations take sport in Australia?
Well, this is a topic of discussion which is gaining uh, increasing popularity and airtime. The Sports Commission, or Sport Australia, has a discrete team, which is, I think, the One Sport team, and they're a group of staff who are charged with really driving this discussion about moving away from our typical federated model of sport delivery which we have in Australia, where we've got the local grassroots clubs. They affiliate with maybe a regional league or association, which then in turn affiliates with the state and then national sporting bodies. And again, that's the way it is, probably because that's the way that it's always been. And we're hearing more now this discussion about, as we've touched on tonight, the waste in the system and declining volunteerism, and the fact that it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to have so many legal entities in a, whether that be in a geographic area or up the line hierarchically in a sport. And we're seeing some big sports make those decisions. So in golf, we've seen the state bodies agree to work together under the one golf model, and that's one that's certainly been driven with support from Sport Australia. We've seen 3 cycling disciplines talking really seriously about coming together in BMX, mountain bike, and road cycling. You know, that then that's the epitome of the parochialism discussion, isn't it? Where we've got people who ride, sure, they all ride bikes, but they're very, very different disciplines.
They are.
And
Mm.
if they can achieve the, I'm trying to come up with a really good pun here for if they can achieve the
Given.
traction.
Oh,
There you go. If
okay.
they can
Okay.
achieve the traction that they've achieved, you know, in bringing together three very different cycling disciplines under the one banner, which isn't quite there yet, I don't think. But if they can get the traction that they've got, then surely we can talk more seriously about, bringing entities that deliver exactly the same sporting activity together in the interest of achieving some of those efficiencies. Just really quickly then, so that's the national and state consideration, and we're seeing that, being discussed quite commonly. But even at the regional level, this is, I may not have discussed this with you yet, but in hockey, we're working with one club that's part of a regional association, and there are, I believe, 9 or 10 other clubs. And this club is really driving the discussion about whether they all need. So, hockey, as you know, is a sport that is played typically at a central location. Clubs might have their own satellite facilities from which they train, but it costs a hell of a lot of money to develop and maintain and replace at the end of its useful life synthetic hockey playing surface. So they all come together, similar to netball and some other sports like tennis. We come together and compete at this central location. So we've got this club, pardon me, which is driving this conversation in this regional association to say, guys, it's really stupid that we are all separate legal entities. Why don't we all just become part of the association? We can still have our own clubs, but we'll just operate as subcommittees. We can have our own bank accounts. We can have our own club shirts. We can have our own logos and colors, but we don't need to be separate legal entities. And so what's the first argument that comes up against that typically? If we're going to go from having 11 legal entities to one?
Tell me it's not shirts again.
It's grants. Oh, but we're going to have only one legal entity that can apply for grant. If that's seriously the
Your business
basis of
model,
your decision making, if that's your business model is all centered around getting grants,
the
then we've
handout
got bigger
mentality.
problems.
Hmm.
Yep, exactly. We've got
It's a
bigger
good point.
problems.
Yeah. And what's just to go back very quickly to the one cycling model is that road and track as a discipline. So Cycling Australia, which was, the leader of road and track and cyclocross, they know that they get their riders from BMX as juniors. And then as they grow up, so does the size of their bikes. And okay, that's great that a lot of people continue in BMX, but a lot of the people who are still continuing in BMX are mammals. They're the middle-aged men in lycra on a Sunday morning having their latte with their very expensive bike in the parking lot. So I always like to make sure that we do get some wins on the board here, Steve, given that we like to take some basket case clubs and turn them into showcase clubs. So what, if you had one that you are most proud of, and this can be a recent one or an old one if you like, what is your greatest success story that you think makes you very proud?
Oh, I'm really proud of how efficient that Bowls Club merge was. But I'm probably most proud of a couple of rugby league clubs that we worked with them probably 5 or 6 years ago. And back then, so a junior and a senior rugby league club operating from the same venue.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see in your face that you probably recognize who I'm talking about here. Um,
I'm just remembering the
and
fights in the car park.
yeah, fisticuffs. That's right. So these were two clubs that, hell would have frozen over before they merged, when the presidents that we worked with 5 or 6 years ago were in those positions. And unsurprisingly, as soon as those two moved on, one from the junior club, one from the senior club, we were kind of left with two management committees scratching their heads saying, why
Why haven't
are
we done this
we,
before?
yeah. Oh, because of those two. So,
Yeah, yeah. So they took their egos and their arrogance with them,
yeah,
and sometimes that was all that's standing in the way. So what you're proud of is having the people win, I suppose.
having the people win, but
Mm.
also we had a bit of a hand in enabling it to dawn on those two individuals that it was time for them to move
Okay.
on. And
Yeah.
that can be really hard, as you know, because these
Absolutely.
are people that have put lots of time in. They've been there for, generations, like you say. And to get them to let go is in a lot of instances,
Mm.
nigh on impossible.
Yeah.
So, and in the same league, then we're working with another rugby league club, a junior club, and and they coexist with a senior club, and there's just no way when those people are involved that those two clubs are going to become one.
Believe it or not, I know
But
who you're talking about again. Some of our listeners definitely will too, Steve. We're going to have some more discussions on the side. Say, yeah, you're
I'll
right.
tell you what, we might even get some of these clubs on. How about that? We'll
Absolutely.
let them put their own predecessors in it.
So it's fascinating in going through this. I'll finish with a little story for you that I was at the QRL Queensland Rugby League conference earlier this year in talking exactly this topic. And I just brought to the attention of some of the people in the room that where there are senior and junior clubs or senior and junior leagues that used to be one entity and they went through, one of them was a breakaway, that quite often people won't remember why they broke away in the first place. Why is it that people have dug their heels in so much to be separate entities, recognizing all the waste and the fact that we can deal with all of that quite simply, and there are processes and everyone goes on their journey. In telling the story about the monkeys. So there were 5 monkeys and they were put into a cage. There's a ladder in this cage and there's some yummy bananas at the top of this ladder. As soon as one of the monkeys climbs the ladder and touches the bananas, they all get squirted with water. And of course, they hate that. Like, it was only that monkey that climbed the ladder that was climbing the ladder. We all got squirted anyway. Another monkey, not the first one that went up because it got squirted and didn't like it. So another monkey goes up the ladder and, of course, gets squirted with water. And all of the other monkeys get squirted as well. And then third monkey goes to climb the ladder, think, oh, yum, bananas. And the other monkeys say, no, you don't climb the ladder, because if you climb the ladder, we all get squirted with water. So don't climb the ladder. Anyway, so this happened a few times until they all realized, well, we don't climb the ladder. We don't want those bananas because they mean getting squirted with water, and we don't like that. And the experimenters take one of the 5 monkeys out and put a fresh monkey into the cage. Fresh monkey looks up the ladder and goes, oh, bananas, yum. Starts climbing the ladder, and the other 4 monkeys go, no, you don't do that, and pull the monkey back down. They take out another monkey until they've taken out all of the original monkeys are gone one at a time, until there are 5 new monkeys in the cage, none of whom have been squirted with water. Yet when they take one of them out and put a new monkey in, all of the monkeys who've never been squirted with water stop that new monkey from climbing the ladder. Say, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. And what I love about that story so much is that it just shows you that we do what we do because that's the way it's always been done, even if we don't know the reason that that's the case. And of course, the second and probably more important reason why I love that story is that it's absolute bollocks. It's one of those stories that management consultants the world over get so much mileage out of because it tells the story of fear of change and all that, but it's just bollocks and made up completely. But I'm still going to get some mileage out of it when we talk about mergers and amalgamations.
When you found that out, that it wasn't actually true and has not, as far as we can garner an experiment that's ever been conducted, did you want to do it? Because I know I did. Maybe with sports club volunteers.
To be perfectly honest, Steve, I don't have 10 monkeys.
But it is a great example of that cultural acceptance of the way that it's always been.
Yep.
And look, to stick with the story, what's to say that one of those new monkeys wouldn't finally get hold of the bananas if they kept on trying? So
Yep.
Don't be held back by the way it's always been done in your club. Look to achieve efficiencies and improvements in your service delivery, which are just, a couple of other things that are amongst the long list of pros for at least considering this.
Absolutely. Steve, as per usual, it's been a wonderful evening of chatting about stuff that we absolutely love. And thank you for not saying we get off on this stuff at all this evening. That's been really good of you. Remember, of course, if you're listening on Apple, to leave us a good review, or if you're listening on Google or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, we always appreciate that. info@cprgroup.com.au will get an email straight to us. Thank you for all of those who have already sent us some great feedback. We appreciate it, and for the ideas for upcoming episodes as well. Please keep them coming. Obviously, we've got some great stuff coming out in our newsletter that's pretty regular, and our social media. So follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn. We've even got an Instagram profile, Steve. There are some lovely photos of you on Instagram.
I made sure of that.
So if you sign up to our newsletter, you'll also learn about all of the other things that we've got going on our webinar series. And we're just about to begin a new one of those, but I'll leave you to find that out in our newsletter. And of course, cprgroup.com.au is a great way to get in contact with us for anything of a general nature. Steve, thank you very much again for spending time with me this evening, and I look forward to catching up again next week.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about something else that we get off on.
Good on you. See ya.
See you next week.